Close your eyes now and let yourself settle into a comfortable position. Feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you and allow your breathing to slow and deepen. Tonight, we're going to embark on a gentle journey through time, back to the very beginnings of what we now call Europe, a continent that emerged not through sudden creation, but through the slow, patient work of countless generations. Imagine yourself drifting back through the centuries, past the familiar landmarks of recent history, beyond the medieval castles and Roman roads, further still through the mists of prehistory. You re-traveling to a time when the very concept of Europe was nothing more than a landmass slowly taking shape, populated by peoples whose names we barely remember, whose daily struggles and small triumphs formed the foundation of everything that would follow. The story of Europe's origins is not one of grand battles or heroic conquests, though these would come later. Instead, it's the quieter story of how humans first learned to live together in this corner of the world, how they tamed the wild forests, how they built the first settlements, and how they slowly, patiently created the rhythms of life that would echo through millennia. Let the sounds of the modern world fade away now. The hum of electricity, the distant traffic, the constant buzz of technology, all of this dissolves as we step back into a time when the loudest sounds were the wind through ancient trees, the lowing of cattle, and the gentle murmur of human voices around evening fires. Daily life immersion. The first European farmers. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast forest in what would one day be called Central Europe. The year is approximately 6000 BCE, and the morning mist clings to the ground like a gentle blanket. The air is cool and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild herbs. This is the world of the first European farmers, the people who would transform this continent from a wilderness into something approaching civilization. You find yourself in a small clearing beside a meandering river. The sound of water moving over stones provides a constant, soothing backdrop to the day's activities. Here, a handful of wooden houses cluster together, the first true village in this region. These structures are simple but sturdy, built from oak timbers and covered with thick thatch that keeps out the rain and wind. Smoke rises lazily from holes in the roofs, carrying the warm scent of burning wood and cooking food. The inhabitants of this village are stirring as dawn breaks. These are the linear pottery people, named for the distinctive patterns they carved into their clay vessels. They represent one of the great migrations in human history, farmers who slowly spread across Europe, bringing with them the knowledge of agriculture that would forever change how humans lived. Watch as a woman emerges from one of the houses. She moves with the unhurried purpose of someone whose day follows ancient rhythms. Her clothing is simple, a woolen dress dyed with plant materials, practical and warm. Her hair is bound back with a leather cord, and her hands already show the calluses of someone who works with earth and grain day after day. She carries a clay pot to the river, and as she kneels to fill it, you can see the careful attention she pays to the water's clarity, testing it with her finger, ensuring it's clean for her family's use. The rhythm of their lives follows the seasons with absolute precision. In spring, you would witness the careful preparation of fields, men and women working together to clear small plots of land, burning away undergrowth, and turning the soil with simple wooden plows pulled by oxen. The oxen themselves are precious domesticated cattle that their ancestors brought from the south, animals that provide not just muscle for farming, but milk, meat, and leather. Imagine yourself helping with the spring planting. The seeds are wheat and barley, varieties that their great-grandparents carefully selected and preserved through countless harvests. Each grain is precious, representing the survival of the community through the coming winter. The work is methodical, almost meditative, making small holes in the earth with a pointed stick, dropping in the seeds, covering them with soil, and moving to the next spot. The sun warms your back as you work, and the rich scent of newly turned earth fills your nostrils. As the day progresses, you observe the complex web of relationships that keeps this small community functioning. There's the old man who tends the pigs, letting them forage in the forest while keeping watch for wolves. His knowledge of the woodland is encyclopedic. He knows which plants are edible, which can be used for medicine, where the best clay can be found for pottery. His weathered hands tell stories of decades spent in harmony with the natural world. The women of the village gather regularly to work on their crafts. Pottery making is both an art and a necessity. They need vessels for storing grain, for cooking, for carrying water. Watch as they shape the clay with practiced hands, creating not just functional objects, but beautiful ones, decorated with the linear patterns that give their culture its name. The clay is mixed with crushed shells or sand to make it stronger, and the finished pots are fired in carefully maintained kilns that reach just the right temperature. Spinning and weaving occupy much of their time as well. The sheep provide wool, which must be cleaned, carded, spun into thread, and then woven into cloth. This is work that happens in the evening, by firelight, with several women working together, their voices rising and falling in conversation as their hands move with automatic skill. The patterns they weave are passed down from mother to daughter, each generation adding subtle variations that mark the passage of time. The children of this village grow up immersed in this world of practical knowledge. By the age of 5 or 6, they're helping with simple tasks, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, pulling weeds from the grain plots. They learn by watching and imitating, absorbing the countless small skills that make survival possible. A young boy learns to identify animal tracks, to know which berries are safe to eat, to understand the sounds that mean danger is approaching. A girl learns to judge the quality of clay, to keep a fire burning at just the right temperature, to recognize the signs that indicate grain is ready for harvest. The evenings in this village are perhaps the most peaceful part of the day. As darkness falls, the community gathers around fires, sharing food and stories. The light flickers on faces weathered by sun and wind, and the sounds of the night, forest owls calling, the distant howl of wolves, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, create a natural symphony that has remained unchanged for thousands of years. Their food is simple but nourishing. Porridge made from barley or wheat forms the basis of most meals, enriched with vegetables from their gardens, onions, peas, lentils. Meat is a luxury, saved for special occasions or when an animal must be slaughtered. When they do eat meat, every part of the animal is used. Nothing is wasted in this world where survival depends on careful resource management. The constant undercurrent of their lives is the awareness of how precarious their existence is. A failed harvest means hunger through the winter. Disease can sweep through their livestock, devastating their economy. Raiders from neighboring tribes might attack, seeking to steal their stored grain or their animals. Yet there's also a deep sense of security in their connection to the land, in the knowledge passed down through generations, in the rhythms of seasonal work that have sustained their people for centuries. As you observe this daily life, you begin to understand how Europe began not with grand gestures or dramatic events, but with the patient work of countless individuals who learned to live in harmony with their environment. These farming communities would spread slowly across the continent, each generation pushing a little further into the wilderness, clearing new fields, establishing new villages, creating the foundation upon which all future European civilization would be built. The tools they use are simple, but effective: stone axes for cutting trees, bone needles for sewing, wooden plows for turning soil. Yet these simple implements represent generations of accumulated knowledge, subtle improvements passed down from parent to child, innovations that make life just a little easier, a little more secure. In the long summer evenings, when the work is done and the community gathers around the fire, you might hear the first stirrings of what would become European culture. Stories are told, myths about the spirits of the forest, legends about the ancestors who first brought farming to this land, tales of heroes who fought against the wilderness and won. These stories serve not just as entertainment, but as repositories of practical knowledge. ways of remembering important information about the natural world, about the proper ways to live in community with others. The rhythm of their lives is deeply connected to the cycles of nature. They rise with the sun and sleep when darkness falls. Their work follows the seasons, planting in spring, tending crops through summer, harvesting in autumn, preparing for winter's hardships. There's a profound peace in this alignment with natural rhythms, a sense of being part of something larger than themselves. As winter approaches, the pace of life slows but doesn't stop. This is the time for indoor work-mending tools, weaving cloth, telling stories, planning for the coming year. The houses become cozy refuges from the cold and wind, warmed by carefully tended fires and filled with the comfortable sounds of human activity. Outside, the forest sleeps under snow, but inside, the community maintains its quiet life, sustained by the grain they've stored, the animals they've sheltered, the preparations they've made through the warmer months. This is how Europe began, not with conquest or drama, but with the quiet persistence of people who learned to transform wilderness into home, who developed the skills and knowledge that would sustain human civilization for millennia to come. Their legacy lives on in every European field, in every domestic animal, in the very idea that humans can live in permanent settlements, growing their own food, creating stable communities that last for generations. Segment 2. Biography Event: The Bronze Age Chieftains and the Birth of European Hierarchy. As the centuries drift by like gentle waves, we find ourselves drawn to a particular moment in European history, a time when the egalitarian farming communities you've just witnessed begin to transform into something more complex. The year is approximately 2000 BCE, and we're going to follow the life of a man whose story illuminates how Europe evolved from simple agricultural settlements into the first hierarchical societies. His name, if we could know it, might have been something like Tyrannes, a name that means thunder in the ancient Celtic tongue. But names fade with time, and what remains is the story of his life, preserved in the burial goods archaeologists would discover thousands of years later. He was what we now call a Bronze Age chieftain, one of the first Europeans to wield not just influence over his immediate family, but power over entire regions. Imagine yourself walking alongside Tyrannes as a young man, perhaps 25 years old, in the rolling hills of what would one day be called Bavaria. The landscape has changed since our farming ancestors first cleared these forests. Now, the clearings are larger, the settlements more permanent, and scattered across the hillsides are the mysterious burial mounds that mark the resting places of the honored dead. Tyrannes was born into a world where copper and tin, the metals that combine to make bronze, have begun to transform human society. Unlike stone, which could be found almost anywhere, these metals must be traded across vast distances. Tin comes from the far reaches of Cornwall and Brittany, copper from the mountains of Austria and Spain. The control of these trade routes and the skilled craftsmen who work these metals has created the first true elite class in European history. Watch as Tyrannes examines a bronze sword, one of the marvels of his age. The blade gleams with a golden sheen that stone can never match, and its edge holds sharp far longer than any flint knife. But more than its practical advantages, this sword represents something new in human society: concentrated wealth, specialized craftsmanship, and the power that comes from controlling resources that others need. The world Tyrannes inhabits is one of increasing complexity. The simple pottery of the linear pottery people has given way to elaborate vessels decorated with intricate patterns. Houses are larger and more sophisticated, some built on elevated platforms as symbols of status. The dead are buried with grave goods that speak of far-flung trade connections: amber from the Baltic, shells from the Mediterranean, metals from across the continent. Follow Tyrannes as he travels to what might be called a market, though it bears little resemblance to anything we would recognize today. It's a seasonal gathering place where several river valleys meet, a location chosen for its access to water transport and its position along natural trade routes. Here, for a few weeks each year, traders from across Europe converge to exchange goods, knowledge, and stories. The sounds of this ancient market drift through the air, the lowing of cattle being driven to trade, the ring of hammers on bronze, the babel of different languages, as merchants from distant regions attempt to communicate. There's the Greek trader who has traveled up the Danube, bringing fine pottery and Mediterranean luxuries. The amber merchant from the Baltic coast, his wagon loaded with the fossilized resin that Europeans prize for its golden beauty. The salt trader from the Alpine regions, carrying blocks of the white mineral that preserves food and enhances flavor. Taranis moves through this gathering with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect. He wears a bronze torque around his neck, a symbol of his status that also represents a significant investment in precious metal. His clothing is finer than what you saw in the farming villages, wool dyed with expensive pigments, leather work. That shows the skills of master craftsmen, bronze pins and clasps that hold his garments in place. But observe carefully how he conducts himself. This is not the crude dominance of a tyrant, but the sophisticated leadership of someone who understands that his power depends on the willing cooperation of others. He settles disputes between traders. With calm authority, ensures that agreements are honored and maintains the peace that makes trade possible. His wealth comes not from taking from others, but from facilitating exchange, from making himself indispensable to the networks that connect distant regions. As the years pass, follow Taranis through the cycles of his life. In his 30s, he establishes what might be called a dynasty, though it's nothing like the royal families of later European history. Instead, it's a careful web of relationships, maintained through marriage alliances, trade partnerships, and mutual obligations. His daughter marries the son of a chieftain from the next valley, creating bonds that will facilitate trade and prevent conflict. His son learns the complex skills of leadership, how to judge the quality of metals, how to negotiate with foreign traders, how to maintain the delicate balance of power that keeps the peace. The establishment of his hall becomes a major undertaking. That reveals much about Bronze Age society. Unlike the simple houses of earlier centuries, this structure is designed to impress. It's built on a slight elevation, visible from the surrounding settlements, with massive oak timbers that required the coordinated labor of dozens of men to transport and erect. The roof is covered with overlapping wooden shingles, and the walls are plastered with clay mixed with straw. Inside, the hall is a marvel of Bronze Age craftsmanship. The central hearth is surrounded by carved stones, and the smoke rises through a carefully constructed opening in the roof. Along the walls hang bronze shields, swords, and spears, not just weapons, but symbols of the military power that underlies all political authority. The most honored guests sit closest to the fire, their positions precisely determined by their status and relationship to Taranis. The feasts held in this hall are legendary throughout the region. They serve multiple purposes: political negotiation, religious ceremony, and social bonding, all combined into elaborate rituals that can last for days. Imagine yourself attending one of these gatherings, watching as Taranis demonstrates his wealth and power through the lavish hospitality he provides. The food is abundant and varied, showcasing the prosperity of his lands. There are roasted joints of beef and pork, fresh fish from the rivers, barley beer served in elaborate bronze vessels, and honey mead that has been aged in wooden casks. The quantity of food consumed at these feasts would feed a farming family for months, but the display of abundance serves important political functions. It demonstrates Taranis' ability to provide for his followers and intimidates potential rivals. As the evening progresses, the hall fills with the sounds of music and storytelling. The Bronze Age has produced the first professional entertainers in European history, bards who travel from hall to hall. carrying news, stories, and songs that bind the scattered communities together into something approaching a shared culture. These performers are highly skilled, able to recite epic poems from memory, to improvise songs that flatter their hosts while subtly conveying political messages, and to play musical instruments made from bronze and wood. The stories they tell are beginning to take on the characteristics of what will become European mythology. There are tales of heroes who venture into the underworld, of gods who control the weather and the harvest, of magical objects that grant power to their possessors. These stories serve not just as entertainment, but as shared reference points, ways of understanding the world that help create cultural unity across the diverse tribes and regions of Bronze Age Europe. But the life of a Bronze Age chieftain is not without its challenges and darkness. The same trade networks that bring prosperity also bring conflict. Raiders from distant regions sometimes attack the merchant caravans, disrupting trade and threatening the economic foundations of Tyrannus's power. Rival chieftains may form alliances against him, forcing him to navigate complex diplomatic situations where a wrong decision could lead to warfare. The weapons that symbolize his status are not merely ceremonial. Bronze Age Europe is a violent place, where disputes are often settled through combat, where the weak are preyed upon by the strong, where the balance of power can shift quickly and brutally. Tyrannus has fought in battles where men fell with bronze spears in their chests, where the ground was soaked with blood, where the screams of the wounded echoed across the valleys. Yet even in describing these harsh realities, we see them through the lens of ritual and ceremony. When Tyrannus dies in battle defending his territory from raiders, his death becomes part of the sacred cycle that governs Bronze Age society. His body is prepared for burial with elaborate rituals, surrounded by the treasures that marked his status in life bronze weapons, gold ornaments, pottery vessels filled with food for the journey to the afterlife. The burial mound constructed for Tyrannus is a massive undertaking, requiring the labor of his entire community. Earth and stones are piled high over his grave, creating a permanent marker that will be visible for generations. The mound becomes a sacred place, a site where his descendants will come to honor his memory and maintain their connection to the land he ruled. As decades pass, Tyrannus's burial mound becomes one of many scattered across the European landscape. These monuments create a new kind of geography, a landscape marked by the presence of the honored dead. They serve as territorial markers, claiming the land for particular families and communities. They also become focal points for religious rituals, places where the living can commune with the spirits of their ancestors. The legacy of men like Tyrannus extends far beyond their individual lives. They represent the emergence of a new kind of European society, one based on hierarchy, specialization, and long-distance trade. The farming communities of earlier centuries continue to exist, but they're now integrated into larger political and economic networks controlled by chieftains, who command resources and loyalty across vast regions. The Bronze Age chieftains also represent the beginning of what we might call European individualism. Unlike the anonymous farmers of earlier centuries, these men are remembered as individuals, their personal qualities and achievements celebrated. In songs and stories, they are buried with objects that reflect their personal tastes and accomplishments, creating archaeological records that allow us to glimpse their individual personalities across the vast gulf of time. This transformation from egalitarian farming communities to hierarchical chieftainships represents one of the great turning points in European history. It sets the stage for everything that follows: the kingdoms of the Iron Age, the empires of Rome and Byzantium, the nation-states of the medieval period, the patterns of leadership, the integration of diverse communities through trade and alliance, the use of wealth and ceremony to maintain political power. All of these elements of European civilization can be traced back to the Bronze Age chieftains who first learned to wield power over their fellow humans. Mystery, archaeology, culture. The sacred landscapes and lost rituals of megalithic Europe, 4000 to 2000 BCE. Now we drift backward through time once more, to an era that predates even our Bronze Age chieftains, to a period when Europe was being transformed by one of the most mysterious and enduring phenomena in human history, the building of megalithic monuments. Let your mind settle into the contemplation of these ancient mysteries, these stone circles and burial chambers that still dot the European landscape like sleeping giants from a forgotten age. Picture yourself standing in the pre-dawn darkness on the Salisbury Plain some 4,000 years ago. The air is crisp with the bite of early morning, and mist clings to the grass in ghostly wisps. Before you rises a structure that defies easy explanation, a circle of massive stones, each one weighing several tons, arranged with mathematical precision that suggests knowledge we can barely comprehend. This is Stonehenge, but not as tourists see it today. This is Stonehenge as it was meant to be experienced, alive with purpose and mystery. The stones themselves seem to pulse with ancient energy in the half-light. The great trilithones, those massive doorways formed by two upright stones, capped by a horizontal lintel frame, specific views of the horizon where the sun and moon rise and set at crucial moments in the year. The smaller blue stones, transported from Wales across hundreds of miles of primitive landscape, glimmer with a faint blue sheen that gives them an otherworldly quality. But Stonehenge is just one note in a vast symphony of stone that stretches across prehistoric Europe. Close your eyes and let your imagination carry you across the continent to the great stone circles of the Orkney Islands, where Neolithic peoples built monuments that rival anything in Egypt or Mesopotamia. The Ring of Brodgar stands like a crown of ancient kings, its stones perfectly positioned to catch the light of the setting sun on the winter solstice. Travel south to the mysterious passage tombs of Ireland, where at Newgrange, a monument older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza, the builders created something extraordinary. For just 17 minutes on the winter solstice, sunlight penetrates the carefully constructed entrance passage and illuminates the burial chamber at the heart of the mound. The precision required for this feat speaks to astronomical knowledge that we're only beginning to understand. The people who built these monuments left us no written records, no explanations of their purpose or meaning. Instead, they spoke in stone, creating a language of astronomy, geometry, and sacred geography that archaeologists are still learning to decode. Each monument is a chapter in a book written in stone, and together they tell the story of a civilization that was far more sophisticated than we once imagined. Consider the staggering logistics involved in their construction. The great stones of Stonehenge were quarried in Wales and transported across nearly 200 miles of primitive landscape. This was accomplished by people who had no wheels, no cranes, no metal tools stronger than copper. The work required the coordinated effort of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, sustained over generations. The very existence of these monuments speaks to a level of social organization and shared purpose that challenges our assumptions about prehistoric society. Imagine yourself among the builders, participating in the great work that will outlast empires. You're part of a community that has committed itself to a project that will take lifetimes to complete. The knowledge of how to move these massive stones, how to position them with astronomical precision, how to create structures that will endure. For millennia, this knowledge is passed down through generations of master builders, each adding their own insights to the accumulated wisdom of their predecessors. The work itself has a ritual quality. Each stone is not merely positioned, but consecrated, blessed with ceremonies that we can only guess at. Archaeological evidence suggests that the builders made offerings as they worked precious objects buried in the foundations, ritual deposits that suggest the construction itself was a sacred act. The line between practical construction and religious ceremony blurs in these ancient contexts. The astronomical alignments of these monuments reveal a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. The builders tracked not just the obvious cycles of the sun and moon, but the more subtle movements of the stars, the 19-year cycle of lunar standstills, the precession of the equinoxes. They encoded this knowledge in stone, creating permanent observatories that could be used by generation after generation to maintain their connection to the cosmos. But these monuments were more than observatories. They were sacred theaters where the great dramas of prehistoric religion were enacted. Imagine yourself participating in a ceremony at Stonehenge during the summer solstice. The entire community has gathered hundreds of people from settlements scattered across the landscape, all converging on this sacred center for the most important ritual of the year. The ceremony begins before dawn, with the community arranged in careful order around the stone circle. The priest astronomers, the keepers of the ancient knowledge, take their positions at key points where the stones frame specific views of the horizon. As the sun rises, its light penetrates the circle, illuminating the altar stone at the center. The moment of perfect alignment arrives, and the crowd releases a collective sigh of wonder and relief. Another year has passed. The cycles continue. The cosmos remains in balance. The rituals performed at these sites likely involved music, dance, and the consumption of sacred substances. Archaeological evidence suggests that feasting was an important component of these gatherings, with the remains of elaborate meals found buried near the monuments. The bones of hundreds of pigs, cattle, and deer speak to celebrations that brought together vast numbers of people in communal acts of consumption and thanksgiving. But the megalithic builders also left us evidence of darker rituals. At some sites, archaeologists have discovered human remains that suggest ritual sacrifice, not the mass slaughter of later civilizations, but careful, ceremonial offerings that speak to beliefs about the relationship between life and death, between the human and divine realms. These discoveries remind us that prehistoric religion, like all religious systems, encompassed both the beautiful and the terrible. The mystery deepens when we consider the broader landscape of megalithic Europe. These monuments don't exist in isolation. They're part of vast sacred geographies that stretch across entire regions. In some areas, the monuments are connected by ancient roads or aligned with natural features like rivers and hills. The builders seem to have conceived of entire landscapes as sacred spaces, with the stone circles and burial chambers serving as focal points in a web of religious significance. The passage tombs of Western Europe represent another facet of this mysterious civilization. These elaborate burial chambers, covered by great mounds of earth and stone, were designed to house the remains of the community's ancestors. But they were more than simple graves. They were portals to the otherworld, places where the living could commune with the spirits of the dead. Inside these tombs, archaeologists have discovered art that ranks among the earliest expressions of human creativity in Europe. The walls are covered with spirals, circles, and geometric patterns that seem to pulse with hidden meaning. These aren't random decorations. They're carefully planned compositions that may represent maps of the otherworld, diagrams of cosmic forces, or instructions for navigating the realm of the dead. The people who created this art had no metals, no advanced tools, yet they achieved effects that rival the work of much later civilizations. They understood how to use natural pigments to create colors that would endure for millennia. They knew how to work stone with such precision that their carvings remain crisp and clear after thousands of years of weathering. As we contemplate these ancient mysteries, we begin to understand that the megalithic builders possessed knowledge that we've lost. They understood their environment in ways that we, with all our technology, struggle to comprehend. They read the landscape like a book, seeing patterns and connections that escape modern perception. They lived in harmony with natural cycles in ways that our industrial civilization has forgotten. The decline of megalithic civilization is as mysterious as its achievements. Around 2000 BCE, the great building projects ceased. The knowledge of how to construct these monuments was lost, and later, peoples treated them with a mixture of reverence and fear. Some monuments were abandoned, others were adapted for new purposes. Still others were deliberately destroyed by those who saw them as pagan relics. Yet the monuments endure, speaking to us across the millennia in their language of stone. They remind us that our ancestors were not primitive savages struggling for survival, but sophisticated peoples with complex spiritual lives and remarkable technical abilities. They had their own forms of science, their own ways of understanding the cosmos, their own methods of creating beauty and meaning. The megalithic builders represent one of the great might-have-beens of European history. Had their civilization continued to develop, had their knowledge been preserved and expanded upon, the course of human history might have been very different. Instead, their achievements remain as mysterious monuments to human potential, reminders of paths not taken and knowledge not preserved. Social elite contrasting daily life. The Celtic Druids and the common folk, 800 to 50 BCE. As our journey through the origins of Europe draws toward its close, we arrive at a period when the continent had achieved a remarkable complexity of social organization. The year is approximately 100 BCE, and we find ourselves in the heart of Celtic Europe, where the mists of prehistory are beginning to lift, revealing a world of striking contrasts between the lives of the elite and the common people. Let us begin with the most mysterious and powerful figures of this era, the Druids. These priest-philosophers represent the culmination of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, the inheritors of the wisdom that built the megalithic monuments, the keepers of laws and lore that bound Celtic society together. Picture yourself in a sacred grove deep in the forests of Gaul, where the morning light filters through ancient oak trees, casting dancing shadows on the moss-covered ground. Here, in this natural cathedral, dwells Cathbad, a druid of the highest rank. His very presence seems to alter the quality of the air around him. He moves with the deliberate grace of someone who has spent decades learning to see patterns invisible to ordinary eyes. His long white beard and carefully braided hair speak of years devoted to study and contemplation. His robes, woven from the finest wool and dyed with rare pigments, mark him as a man of exceptional status, yet they're cut in simple lines that suggest humility before the natural world. The education of a druid, like Cathbad, was a process that consumed the better part of a lifetime. From childhood, he was immersed in the oral traditions of his people, learning to memorize vast quantities of poetry, law, genealogy, and sacred knowledge. The Druids trusted nothing to writing. They believed that knowledge written down lost its power, that true wisdom could only be preserved in the living memory of trained minds. Watch as Cathbad begins his morning ritual, moving through the grove. With practiced steps, pausing at certain trees to touch their bark, listening to sounds that ordinary ears cannot detect. He knows the properties of every plant, the meaning of every bird call, the significance of every change in the weather. His knowledge encompasses law and medicine, astronomy and agriculture, poetry and prophecy. He is simultaneously judge, doctor, teacher, and priest, a living repository of all the knowledge his people consider sacred. The power of the Druids extended far beyond their local communities. They formed a network that spanned the entire Celtic world, from Ireland to the Black Sea, from Scotland to the Alps. Young nobles from across Europe would travel to Britain to study in the Druidic schools, where they would spend 20 years, mastering the complex curriculum of Celtic higher learning. This educational system created a shared culture that transcended tribal boundaries and political divisions. But to understand the full complexity of Celtic society, we must also observe the lives of ordinary people who lived under the influence of these powerful elites. Let us travel from the sacred grove to a typical Celtic hill fort, where the majority of the population lived their daily lives in the shadow of their social superiors. The hill fort rises from the landscape like a crown of earth and stone, its massive ramparts visible for miles across the countryside. These fortifications represent some of the most sophisticated military engineering of the ancient world, with multiple defensive lines, cleverly designed gates, and strategic positions that command the surrounding territory. Yet they also serve as symbols of social hierarchy, physical manifestations of the power that the Celtic elite wielded over their subjects. Inside the fort, the organization of space reflects the rigid social stratification of Celtic society. At the highest point stands the Hall of the Chieftain, a massive timber structure with walls of woven branches covered in clay and a roof thatched with reeds. The building itself is a marvel of Celtic craftsmanship, with carved wooden pillars, bronze fittings, and decorative elements that display the wealth and power of its owner. The Chieftain's Hall serves multiple functions simultaneously: a residence, a court of justice, a religious center, and a symbol of political authority. The interior is arranged to emphasize social hierarchy, with the most honored guests sitting closest to the fire, their positions determined by complex rules of precedence that reflect status, kinship, and political alliance. Contrast this with the dwellings of the common people, clustered around the base of the hill fort like children huddled around their parent. These are simple roundhouses, built with the same techniques that their ancestors used for centuries. The walls are made of woven branches covered with clay, the roofs are thatched with straw, and the floors are simply packed earth. Each house shelters an extended family: parents, children, grandparents, and sometimes unmarried siblings, all sharing the single room that serves as kitchen, workshop, and sleeping quarters. The daily life of these common folk follows patterns that have remained essentially unchanged for generations. The men work the fields that surround the hill fort, growing barley, wheat, and oats using iron plows that represent the most advanced agricultural technology of their time. The women manage the household, spinning wool into thread, weaving cloth on vertical looms, preparing food, and caring for the children. The children help with simple tasks appropriate to their age, gradually learning the skills they will need as adults. Yet even in these humble dwellings, we find evidence of the sophisticated Celtic culture that permeated all levels of society. The pottery is decorated with elaborate geometric patterns. The metalwork shows remarkable skill in working iron and bronze, and the textiles are woven with complex designs that reflect centuries of artistic tradition. The Celts were, above all, a people who valued beauty and craftsmanship, and this aesthetic sensibility extended from the grandest chieftain's hall to the humblest peasant's cottage. The relationship between the elite and the common people was complex and multifaceted. The chieftain provided protection, settled disputes, and ensured the proper performance of religious rituals. In return, the common people provided labor, military service, and a portion of their agricultural produce. This was not a relationship of equals, but it was governed by ancient customs that provided some protection for the weak and imposed obligations on the strong. The Druids played a crucial role in maintaining this social order. They were the arbiters of law, the keepers of tradition, and the mediators between the human and divine realms. Their knowledge of customary law gave them the authority to settle disputes and ensure justice, while their understanding of religious ritual made them indispensable to the spiritual life of the community. But the Druids also served as a check on the power of the chieftains. Their education and wisdom gave them a moral authority that even the most powerful warriors respected. They could refuse to perform the religious ceremonies that legitimized political power, and their curse was believed to bring misfortune and death. This created a balance of power that prevented any single individual from exercising absolute authority. The seasonal festivals of the Celtic year provided occasions when the entire community came together, temporarily suspending the normal social hierarchy. At Samhain, the festival that marked the beginning of winter, the boundary between the living and the dead was believed to become permeable. The Druids would perform elaborate rituals to ensure the community's safety during the dark months ahead, while the common people would gather to share food, drink, and stories. These festivals were times of abundance and celebration, when the wealth of the elite was distributed to the community through lavish feasting and gift-giving. The chieftain's hall would be thrown open to all comers, and for a few days, the ordinary people would eat meat, drink mead, and enjoy luxuries that were normally reserved for their social superiors. The contrast between elite and common life was perhaps most visible in death. When a chieftain died, the entire community would participate in elaborate funeral rituals that could last for days. The body would be dressed in finest clothing, surrounded by weapons, jewelry, and other symbols of status, and buried in a massive grave marked by great stone monuments. The funeral feast would consume vast quantities of food and drink, demonstrating the dead man's wealth and ensuring that his memory would be preserved in the community's collective consciousness. The death of a common person was marked by simpler ceremonies, but even these reflected the Celtic belief that death was merely a transition to another form of existence. The body would be buried with personal possessions, a favorite pot, a treasured piece of jewelry, tools needed for work in the afterlife. The grave might be marked by a small stone, and the family would gather periodically to remember the deceased and ensure that their spirit remained connected to the world of the living. As we observe these contrasting ways of life, we begin to understand how Celtic society maintained its stability over centuries. The rigid hierarchy provided order and security, while the shared culture created bonds that transcended social divisions. The Druids served as the guardians of tradition, ensuring that ancient knowledge and customs were preserved and transmitted to future generations. The Roman transformation, when worlds collide, 50 BCE to 400 CE, the mists of time carry us forward now to witness one of the most profound transformations in European history. Picture yourself standing on the banks of the Rhine in the year 50 BCE, watching as two worlds prepare to meet in ways that will reshape the continent forever. On one side, the familiar world of Celtic Europe, the sacred groves, the hill forts, the ancient rhythms of life we have come to know. On the other, the disciplined columns of Roman legions, representatives of a civilization that will impose new patterns of thought and living across half the known world. Let us follow the story of Marcus Flavius Secundus, a Roman centurion stationed on the Germanic frontier, and through his eyes witness how the Roman presence gradually transformed the daily lives of ordinary Europeans. Marcus is a practical man, a career soldier who has served in Gaul, Britain, and now along the Rhine. His weathered face speaks of decades spent in military camps, and his calloused hands know the weight of sword and shield. Yet he is also a product of Roman civilization, literate in a world where most people cannot read, trained in engineering and administration, as well as warfare. Observe Marcus as he oversees the construction of a new fort along the Rhine. This is not the improvised earthwork of Celtic warriors, but a precisely planned installation built according to standardized patterns used throughout the empire. The fort is perfectly rectangular, with stone walls rising 20 feet from the ground, topped by wooden palisades and watchtowers. Inside, the buildings are arranged in orderly rows: barracks for the soldiers, workshops for the craftsmen, granaries for supplies, and at the center, the headquarters building where the business of administration is conducted. But this fort is more than a military installation. It's a seed of Roman civilization planted in barbarian soil. Around its walls, a civilian settlement quickly develops. attracted by the security and economic opportunities that Roman presence provides. Celtic artisans bring their goods to trade with the soldiers. Roman merchants establish shops and taverns, and gradually, a new kind of community emerges. Watch as Marcus conducts his daily inspection of the fort, moving through spaces that impose Roman order on the European landscape. The streets are paved with stone. The buildings are constructed with mathematical precision, and everything is designed for efficiency and permanence. The contrast with the organic, flowing architecture of Celtic settlements is stark here. Humanity has imposed its will on nature, rather than adapting to natural forms. The transformation extends beyond mere architecture. The Romans bring with them new technologies, new forms of social organization, and new ways of thinking about the world. In the fort's workshop, skilled craftsmen work with tools and techniques unknown to their Celtic predecessors. The potter's wheel produces vessels of unprecedented uniformity. The glassblower creates transparent containers that seem almost magical to eyes accustomed to clay and wood. And the metalworker forges steel that surpasses anything the Celts could produce. Perhaps the most profound change is in the realm of written language. Marcus maintains detailed records of everything supplies received, soldiers present for duty, messages sent and received, accounts of income and expenditure. This culture of documentation transforms how information is preserved and transmitted. Where the Celts relied on the living memory of druids, the Romans create permanent records that can be consulted by future generations. Follow Marcus as he visits the civilian settlement that has grown around the fort. Here, we see the gradual fusion of Roman and Celtic cultures that will define much of European history. The buildings show Roman influence in their construction techniques and layout, but they're built by local craftsmen using materials from the surrounding landscape. The inhabitants wear Roman-style clothing, but it's woven from local wool and decorated with traditional Celtic patterns. The market that develops in this settlement represents a new form of economic organization. Unlike the seasonal gatherings of Celtic times, this market operates continuously, with permanent shops and regular trading relationships. Roman coins provide a standardized medium of exchange, replacing the barter systems that dominated earlier periods. The market is regulated by Roman law, with standardized weights and measures, and officials who ensure fair trading practices. Yet the transformation is not without its tensions and tragedies. The old Celtic way of life doesn't disappear quietly. Fights back, sometimes literally. Marcus has witnessed the aftermath of tribal uprisings, seen the burned remains of Roman settlements, and participated in the brutal suppression of rebellions. The Roman method of dealing with resistance is systematic and thorough, designed to break the will of subject peoples and ensure their permanent submission. The Druids, as the keepers of Celtic tradition and the focal point of resistance to Roman rule, face particular persecution. Their sacred groves are cut down, their temples destroyed, their rituals banned. Some flee to remote areas where Roman authority is weak. Others adapt by becoming Roman priests or teachers, and still others simply disappear, their ancient knowledge dying with them. But as the decades pass, a new synthesis emerges. The children and grandchildren of the original Celtic inhabitants grow up in a world where Roman and Celtic elements are increasingly blended. They speak Latin as well as their ancestral languages. They worship Roman gods alongside Celtic deities, and they participate in Roman institutions while maintaining many traditional customs. Marcus himself undergoes a transformation during his years on the frontier. Initially, he sees only the differences between Roman civilization and Celtic barbarism. But as he spends time among the local people, he begins to appreciate the depth of their traditional knowledge, the beauty of their craftsmanship, and the wisdom of their adaptation to the natural environment. His reports to his superiors gradually shift from simple military intelligence to more nuanced observations about the culture and customs of the peoples he governs. The Roman presence also transforms the physical landscape of Europe. New roads cut straight lines across the countryside, connecting distant regions and facilitating trade and communication. Roman engineering brings aqueducts that supply clean water to growing towns. Amphitheaters, where new forms of entertainment are staged, and baths that introduce new concepts of hygiene and social interaction. The villa system represents another profound change in how Europeans relate to the land. These large agricultural estates, owned by Roman citizens and worked by slaves and tenant farmers, replace the small-scale farming communities that had characterized European agriculture for millennia. The villa is both a working farm and a luxurious residence with elaborate decorations, central heating, and amenities that represent the highest standard of living available in the ancient world. Yet even as Roman civilization spreads across Europe, it begins to change in response to local conditions. The empire is too vast and diverse to impose uniform practices everywhere. In Britain, Roman villas incorporate Celtic decorative elements. In Gaul, Roman temples are built on the sites of Celtic sacred places. In Germany, Roman military tactics adapt to local conditions and enemy strategies. The religious transformation is perhaps the most complex aspect of this cultural fusion. Roman polytheism proves remarkably adaptable, incorporating local deities and practices into its pantheon. Celtic gods are given Roman names and attributes. Celtic festivals are transformed into Roman holidays, and sacred sites are converted, rather than destroyed. This religious synthesis creates new forms of spirituality that blend elements from both traditions. As the centuries pass, the Roman frontier becomes less a barrier between civilizations and more a zone of cultural exchange. Barbarian tribes beyond the frontier adopt Roman technologies and customs, while Roman settlements incorporate barbarian practices and personnel. The army itself becomes increasingly barbarized, with Germanic warriors serving in Roman units and rising to positions of command. The transformation reaches its culmination in the late Empire, when barbarian kings rule in the name of Roman emperors, when Germanic law is administered by Roman officials, and when the distinction between Roman and barbarian becomes increasingly meaningless. The Europe that emerges from this process is neither purely Roman nor purely barbarian, but something new, a hybrid civilization that will form the foundation of medieval European culture. The twilight of the ancient world, Christianity, and the birth of medieval Europe, 400 to 800 CE. As our journey through the origins of Europe draws toward its close, we find ourselves in an era of profound transformation, when the classical world of Rome gives way to something entirely new. The year is 450 CE, and across Europe, the familiar structures of Roman civilization are crumbling, replaced by new forms of organization, new sources of authority, and new ways of understanding humanity's place in the cosmos. Let us follow the story of Brother Columba, an Irish monk who embodies the spiritual revolution that is reshaping European consciousness. Born in a world where Christianity is still a relatively new force, Columba represents the generation that will carry the Christian faith into the darkest corners of post-Roman Europe, creating new centers of learning and civilization in the ruins of the old world. Picture yourself in the monastery of Iona, perched on a small island off the coast of Scotland. The year is 563 CE, and Columba has just arrived to establish what will become one of the most important religious centers in medieval Europe. The island itself seems almost otherworldly, surrounded by gray seas that stretch to the horizon, covered with rough grass and ancient stone, inhabited only by seabirds and the occasional seal. The monastery that Columba builds here is unlike anything we have seen in our journey through European history. It represents a new form of community, one based not on kinship or military alliance, but on shared spiritual commitment and intellectual pursuit. The buildings are simple wooden cells for the monks, a small church for worship, a scriptorium, where manuscripts are copied, and workshops where the community's material needs are met. But within these humble structures, a revolution is taking place. The monks of Iona are creating a new form of European civilization, one that will preserve and transmit the learning of the ancient world while adapting it to Christian purposes. In the scriptorium, Brother Columba works by candlelight, carefully, copying the sacred texts that will carry Christian teaching to future generations. His pen moves slowly across the vellum, creating not just words, but works of art manuscripts illuminated with intricate patterns that blend Christian symbolism with Celtic artistic traditions. The daily life of the monastery follows rhythms that are both ancient and revolutionary. The monks rise before dawn for the first prayers of the day, their voices echoing across the water as they chant the psalms that have been sung by Christians for centuries. But these are not the elaborate rituals of Roman temples or the seasonal ceremonies of Celtic druids. This is something new, a form of worship that emphasizes inward transformation and personal relationship with the divine. The monastery serves multiple functions in this post-Roman world. It is simultaneously a school where young men learn to read and write, a hospital where the sick are cared for, a center of agricultural innovation where new farming techniques are developed, and a repository of knowledge where the learning of the ancient world is preserved and transmitted. The monks are scholars, teachers, farmers, and craftsmen all at once. But perhaps most importantly, the monastery is a launching point for missionary activity. From Iona, Columba and his followers venture forth to establish new monasteries throughout Scotland and northern England, carrying Christianity to peoples who have never known Roman rule. These missions represent a new form of cultural expansion, one based not on military conquest, but on persuasion and example. Follow Columba as he travels through the Scottish Highlands, moving from village to village, teaching and preaching to communities that have maintained their traditional ways of life throughout the period of Roman occupation. His approach is gentle and adaptive. He doesn't simply condemn the old ways, but finds ways to incorporate them into Christian practice. Sacred springs become sites of Christian pilgrimage. Ancient festivals are transformed into Christian holy days, and traditional stories are retold with Christian meanings. The transformation that Columba represents is taking place across Europe as Christianity spreads through the former Roman territories and beyond. In Ireland, which was never conquered by Rome, Christian monasteries become centers of learning that rival anything in the classical world. Irish monks preserve not only Christian texts, but also the literature and learning of pagan antiquity, creating a bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. The technology of manuscript production that the monasteries develop represents a crucial innovation in the preservation and transmission of knowledge. Unlike the papyrus scrolls of the ancient world, which were fragile and short-lived, the vellum codices created by medieval monks are designed to last for centuries. Each manuscript is a work of art as well as a repository of knowledge, decorated with illuminations that make the text beautiful as well as instructive. But the monasteries are not isolated communities. They are connected by networks of travel and communication that span the continent. Monks journey from Ireland to Rome, from England to Germany, carrying with them not just religious teachings, but also practical knowledge about agriculture, medicine, and craftsmanship. These monastic networks become the first truly European institutions, creating cultural connections that transcend political boundaries. The decline of Roman cities and the rise of monastic communities represents a fundamental shift in how Europeans organize their social lives. The urban civilization that Rome had created gives way to a more dispersed pattern of settlement, with small communities centered around monasteries, manor houses, and fortified settlements. Life becomes more localized, more self-sufficient, and more closely connected to the natural environment. Yet this is not simply a return to prehistoric simplicity. The monasteries preserve and develop sophisticated technologies, from the water mills that grind grain to the mechanical clocks that regulate the prayers of the community. They maintain schools where classical learning is preserved and transmitted, and they develop new forms of agriculture that increase productivity and support growing populations. The law codes that emerge during this period represent another aspect of the transformation from ancient to medieval Europe. These codes blend Roman legal principles with Germanic customary law and Christian moral teachings, creating new forms of justice that reflect the hybrid nature of early medieval civilization. The monastery often serves as a court where disputes are resolved according to these new legal principles. The art that emerges from this period shows the same creative synthesis that characterizes other aspects of early medieval culture. The illuminated manuscripts produced in monasteries like Iona combine Christian symbolism with Celtic artistic traditions, creating works of stunning beauty that rival anything produced in the classical world. The high crosses that mark sacred sites throughout Ireland and Scotland blend Christian iconography with traditional Celtic designs, creating monuments that are both religious and artistic statements. As we observe the world that Columba and his contemporaries are creating, we see the birth of what will become medieval European civilization. This is a world that has absorbed the best of the classical heritage while adapting it to new circumstances and new beliefs. It is a world that values learning and preserves knowledge, but in new forms and for new purposes. It is a world that maintains connections across vast distances, but through religious rather than political networks. The transformation is not without its costs. Much of the classical learning is lost, cities decline, and trade networks are disrupted. The sophisticated, urban civilization that Rome had created gives way to a more fragmented and localized world. Yet this new world also creates opportunities for innovation and creativity, as new forms of art, literature, and social organization emerge from the synthesis of classical, barbarian, and Christian elements. The Europe that emerges from this period of transformation is recognizably the ancestor of the medieval world that will reach its full flowering in the centuries to come. It is a world shaped by Christianity, but enriched by the cultural diversity of its various peoples. It is a world that honors tradition, but remains open to innovation. It is a world that values both contemplation and action, both learning and practical skill. As we drift away from the monastery of Iona and the world of Brother Columba, we carry with us an understanding of how the ancient world of our ancestors was transformed into the medieval world that would dominate European history for the next 1,000 years. The changes we have witnessed represent not just the end of one era and the beginning of another, but the birth of a new form of civilization that would eventually spread across the globe.